All right, welcome to part 2 of our video on building document search with Bubble, OpenAI, and Pinecone. Today we're focusing on the actual asking of the question, so taking the question, embedding it into vectors with OpenAI, then searching the vector database in Pinecone based on those vectors to find the similar documents, returning that to Bubble, and constructing a prompt that then gets sent back to OpenAI with the question and the context of the matched responses that are related to the question that we found in the database in Pinecone. So let's go in, and we have a couple things to set up. Basically, we'll walk through this flow. But to start off, we're going to go ahead and just go into the Bubble editor. We're going to go back into the API connector and set up two things here to make sure that we're able to get going on this. One is going to be within the OpenAI side, and the other is going to be within the Pinecone side. So first, let's start with Pinecone side. So we're going to need to do a new API call that's mainly for querying by vector. So let's go on the Pinecone side. You'll see we have about 115 vectors in this index here that we made for the video. And if I go back into docs and I go to the API reference, we're going to focus on, in the vector operations, query. And we're in here, you can query by a couple of different things, whether it's by the ID of a specific vector, but we're going to be querying based on the vector itself, so find matching vectors to that. So there's a couple different things. Again, we're going to go through and reconstruct something here. So we will go ahead and do that, and we'll put in some information up here to make sure it all kind of flows through. But let's go through this. So the header, we have a API key that we're going to need to put in. So if I go back to the Pinecone side, API key, I'm just going to show this one that we made for the video, copy that, and then put that in here. So it automatically populates it in the top there. The base URL is going to be this URL video. So if I go back here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Cool. And it's going to reload there. All right. So now finally, we're just going to quickly set up some namespace. We use Bubble Search for everything for this. Again, this might be dynamic. You can choose to do that. Top K is how many results it's going to return. We're going to say 10. That's the default that they try to use within Pinecone. And then we are going to say include metadata on true because we want to get the ID for the document just in case we need to use it for something. It will automatically return the document ID, document chunk ID, which is the ID that's in Pinecone. But we also want to get the metadata as well when we return it back. Again, I'm going to put in a couple numbers here in the vector just as a placeholder so that it shows up in the curl command that we're building over here on the right. The ID, obviously, we are not going to do that because we're not searching based on ID. We're searching based on vector. And you can see here, can you be used? Each query request can only contain one of these parameters, queries, vector, or ID. We're using vector. So we don't want to put the ID in there. And then finally, I put two different documents in here, and we're going to use an example where you want to choose the document you want to search. You don't have to do this. You can have it search across all the documents in a database or index. You can choose other metadata to constrain what it's going to filter on. But I'm going to go ahead and choose a filter to filter on document ID. So this is the master document that it is, and then I'm just going to leave it as new value for now because we're going to import that and change that as a dynamic value on the Bubble side. Sweet. I think we got everything we need. We got a document ID. We've got that's including metadata. We have a vector that we're going to replace with a code there. Bubble search the namespace, and top K is 10. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole thing and then go back over to Bubble. And we are going to import another API call based on a curl. So now we got that. Step one, change the name. And so query by vector is going to be the name here. Again, we're going to make that an action because this is going to be called from a workflow. All right, we got the query URL in here properly. We got the API key. We're going to change all of this to private on the top on the headers. And then now we're going to go through and make these values dynamic in here. So I'm going to make this document ID dynamic. I am going to then make the vector that it's going to search by also vector to query. That's going to be dynamic. And I think that's it. So that's basically all we're going to do is, like, in the end, we're going to have a vector put in. It's going to search by that, and then we're going to have a document ID. In order to initialize this, we're actually going to have to get a real document ID and a real vector to search. As I think I showed you before, if you need a large vector number, a good way to do that is actually to go to the OpenAI embeddings call and actually reinitialize it with something else. One of the documents I have is about using Ableton and their new features in Ableton 11. So comping is one of those new features. So we're just going to use that as an example. So what is comping? I'm going to reinitialize. And then if I show raw data, I can see the embedding. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole long list of 1,536 numbers. And we're going to go back over here and input that into vector to query. Sweet. And then document ID, we actually need a document ID from one of the documents. So if I go to the document, let's say Ableton Live, and this is the document ID. And if I go back to the plugin, I can then put this into quotation marks. And then I can now initialize the call. It's going to search the Pinecone database based on this vector, and specifically only in this document. So initialize that call. We got back a list. It's actually going to return a number of them, 10 to be exact. And again, it's going to return an ID for the text chunk. It's going to return the document ID, and then also provides a score, which is a score of how much it's matched by. In this instance, it's 0.79. 1, I believe, is a perfect match. So cool. Now we're going to say, great, save. We're ready to go on that side. Now, the next thing that we need to do is set up the OpenAI API call specifically for doing the chat completions. I'm going to use ChatGPT 3.5 or GPT 3.5 Turbo using the chat completions API route, and we'll kind of go through that. So if I go to the API reference on the OpenAI side, I will actually go to chat, and then I'll use this curl command, and we're actually going to have to add some stuff in here in order to make sure it's all done properly. We need a couple additional things in here. But first we'll start with this. So we'll copy that curl command. We'll go back to Bubble. I will import another call with the curl command, and then we will import, and we'll get this in here. So you have basically the model is GPT 3.5 Turbo, messages. So in that, the chat one, everything is sent as a message, but it kind of works as the normal completions. You just put the prompt here, which is exactly what I'm first going to do. This is going to make this a dynamic value. And so this is where we will put the prompt later on. Cool. Uncheck that. And then I'm actually going to add in a couple more items in here. And you can either add them in after model, or you can add them in after the array, which is messages. I think it's easier to add it in after model. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And the two things I'm going to add in, one is temperature. So this is a value that determines how creative it's going to be. Because we want it to answer it based on the context that it's given, we actually don't want it to be too creative. So I want to make sure it doesn't default to 1, and we actually go to a lower number. We're going to use 0.2 there. So if I go, so it's temperature. So on the bubble editor side, we are just going to put in quotation marks temperature spelled correctly. Colon, and then we are going to put in 0.2. and then comma. And so that's how you would add in another parameter in here. And I believe the one other thing I want to add in is the max number of tokens. And let's look at the syntax there. I believe it's just max underscore tokens. So we'll copy that. So it defaults to infinite number of tokens. But if I want to limit it to just make sure that we don't use too many tokens, I will limit it to, let's say, 1,000. Great. Again, comma after that, and that should be all set to go. The last thing we need to do is get this token here from the for the authorization side. Go ahead and get that input there. Again, I'm going to mark these two as private. We're going to change this to chat completions, and then we're going to make this an action. All right, so let's look through this. Name, action, private on the two headers, JSON body, I think all ready to go, prompt, and let's just put in anything right now. We'll build the prompt as it is, but what happens when you mix blue and red? I think that's a question that OpenAI should be able to answer. So let's initialize that call, and we get back, again, we get back a choices, a message, so forth. We can look at the raw data. So when blue and red are mixed together, they create the color purple is the message that we get back from the assistant. And so we'll use that kind of path to be able to go through that. All right, so save that. That's all ready to go. And now we are ready on the API side, and we just got to go through and build out the workflow on the Bubble side. So step one, we're going to go to question, custom question. We can go to the design side. Basically, what I built out in here was just basically the ability to choose a document. So here, it doesn't have anything in here, but if I say type of choices, and we're going to say document, choices search, we're going to say do a search for documents. We're not going to add any constraints. Cool. And then option caption is current option's name. And so that's what we're going to do there. And so that gives you the ability to choose the document you want the answer from. So if I go over to here, which is the preview, let's load this up, you can see I can say State of the Union or Ableton Live, what's new in 11 document. And then we can answer a question based on that. All right. And then on the Bubble Editor side, we then want to go through and like what happens when I ask the question. So let's build out the workflow here. So step one, as we talked about, is that we need to embed the question text to vector. We need to make that a vector. And then we query it by Pinecone. So if we go back to the Bubble Editor, I will first use a plugin, and we will do an OpenAI embedding, which is what is the question. So the question text there is that. Let's make it a dynamic value, which is multi-line input, ask question, value. And I will do that formatted as JSON safe. That puts the quotation marks on the two ends, as well as escapes any special characters if anyone puts anything in there. So that's the step one. So from there, we're going to get a vector embedding, and now we need to take that to Pinecone. We go to plugins, again, Pinecone, query by vector, and we need a document ID. And so that will be the dropdown choose a documents values unique ID. So it's a document and it's a unique ID. And again, we need it formatted as JSON safe. We need a vector to query, which is the result of step one's data's first items embedding. And that's the values, that's the list of numbers for the embedding for what was provided back. So now it's going to go through and search that, and it's going to return a list of 10 results. All right, now we're going to go into the next part, which is where we're going to take the Pinecone results and then construct a prompt and then put that into the OpenAI completions side. So basically we need to get all the matches, put it into the prompt as context, and then ask the question based on the context. So on the Bubble side, we just quickly, we will go into plugins, we will go into chat completions. Within chat completions, we need to reconstruct a prompt. It's best to do that using arbitrary it's best to use that using arbitrary data or text. There we go. And we're going to insert basically some text at the beginning, which is please answer the following question based on the following context. I don't need the word following in there twice. So question, please say you do not know the answer. If you don't, I'm going to quickly add in some things, which is the question. On the question side, we're going to basically take the value from the question input, and then we are also going to then need to add in answer here at the back end. So basically, this is the construction of it. Is you say, answer the question based on the following context, you give it the context, give it the question again, and then you give it the space to answer it, the question. And here's where the context is where we put in the results from Pinecone. So because in Pinecone we're only storing the vectors, we can't directly take the information from Pinecone. But what we can do is basically we can search the text document chunks, the text content of those chunks in the Bubble database and match it to what was found or returned from the Pinecone side. So first up is we're going to do a search for, and the search for is a document chunk, and the constraint is going to be unique ID instead of equals, because we're getting back a list of 10. It's going to be unique ID is in the step 2 Pinecone queries matches each item's ID. So this is the construction. Unique ID is in this list, which is all the matches, and each item's ID is what we're actually searching for and matching based on. So we got that, which is great. And now we need to add more to it, because that itself is just a list of document chunks. But that's not text in the arbitrary text world, so we need to make it into text. So the next thing, now that we have a list, what we can actually do is we can format that list as text. So if I say format it as text, and the content to show per list item is actually this document chunk's text content, because that's the text that we want, and we want to delimit it by a space. That way we're just separating each text content by a space. We can do it by a comma, you can do it by anything. Heck, I can even put like one of these things, and then it'll delimit it based on that. So you can do it that way, and then it'll do all the text that way. So once I have that done, you'll see if you go back to arbitrary text, now we have context, search for document chunks, formatted as text, and we have that where it's taking each text text content, delimiting it by that, and so forth. And then we have the question from the multi-input ask question value, and then answer there. And the last thing that we need to do is format it as JSON safe, so that prompt gets the quotation marks on the either end, as well as escaping any non-JSON safe characters. All right, sweet. Now, what do we do with this data? How do we get it back to the front end? And that's where we're going to do some just a quick thing, depending on how you want to display it. I'm just going to add a group in. I'm going to add it in there, and then that group is going to be a text completions choice, okay? And the data source, we can leave it blank for now. And then from here, I'm just gonna, quickly fix some things, make this a column, make this go across the whole width, and then I'm actually just going to put in a text item inside of here, which is going to be the answer. And so it's going to be parent groups chat completions choice, message content. And that's what's going to then actually get put back into this box. Again, let's do some quick layout. We don't need it to be fixed widths. It can go across the whole thing. We don't need it to be a min height. It's going to fit height to that. And then I can make this fit height to content and take out the min height and so forth. And basically, when there's nothing there yet, it won't really show anything. But once I display the information there and so forth. So now the question is, how do I get the data there? Because it's triggered based on this workflow and the query happening. And so let's name this group that was created here. Let's name it answer box. Okay. And so now if I go back to the workflow, I can now add a new action, which is element action, display data, and the action is group answer box, and the data display is OpenAI chat completions, choices, first item. And so now we're taking that response, that first item, and we're displaying it or sending it to this group box. And so then now it has the information to then use to then complete the text there. Cool. So now if I go back, everything should be set up to go through that whole process. So we've done the asking question. We've embedded the vector. We've queried Pinecone for the data. We've now matched get those matches, put it into, constructed a prompt, and we've sent it to OpenAI to get a response back. So now if I go back to ask a question, I can choose a document, say Ableton Live, what's new in 11, and I can ask that question, what is new about comping in Ableton 11? Sweet. And if I ask that question, it's going to go through that process. Embed, search Pinecone, then return back results, go forward, and then send that off to OpenAI. And now we got this response back. Comp has a new feature introduced in Ableton 11 that allows users to pick the best moments of each recorded performance and so forth. So now it's given a response specifically based on the document that was about Ableton 11's new features. Didn't even have to spell Ableton right and still got it right. Cool. So that's it. So we were able to then go through this process. If I wanted to ask a question of the State of the Union, even if I asked the same question, for example, what's going to happen? What should happen is that there's no information provided in the context about comping in Ableton 11, because in the State of the Union, Joe Biden didn't talk about Ableton 11. But if I asked a question about what is going on in Ohio, we should be able to get a response back about what's going on in Ohio. I think there's some, Intel is building a semiconductor factory. There's a new bridge between Kentucky and Ohio. So those are the things going on in Ohio. So it searched for the document, found the things about Ohio, returned those context, and enabled the chat completions to answer the question based on the context that was provided. Sweet. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed the videos, and good luck building out your own version of this.